Welcome everybody to tonight's discussion of the Fabian Society. Mike Smith's my name. I'm a member of the local committee here in Wellington, and it's my great pleasure to introduce Alan Emerson, who I've known for many, many years. Alan has been a journalist in the past, news editor at Radio New Zealand, currently writes for the farming world and lives in the Wairarapa and the local Wairarapa Times. The topic tonight is BRICS Plus, and there's to be a meeting in Kazan in Russia in a couple of weeks, which will bring together the original BRICS members who are Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa, plus another at least 5 other major countries. It's a grouping that is beginning the opening up to a multipolar world, looking at different ways of developing international finance, and has been called in some respects the successor to the developing world organizations that were active 20 or so years ago. When I went looking for, I think this meeting is going to be extraordinarily significant for the future of the world and indeed for the future of New Zealand. When I went looking for people who had written about it, though, I found 2 people only. One was Geoffrey Miller, who writes for Democracy Project and is a student down at Otago. And the other was Alan, who wrote an article, a very good article, in Farmers Weekly last year about it. So it's great to have you here, Alan, with your experience and your knowledge. And I think this is something I'm really looking forward to your exposition of what I think is going to be an extremely important set of developments for us in New Zealand. So, thank you very much. Please welcome Alan Emerson.
Thank you for that. Yeah, Mike and I go back to the mid-70s in Palmerston North, and I'd like to say hello to Marion as well. We don't go back that far, but it's good to see you here. Thanks for the opportunity to be here to discuss BRICS, because I'm really passionate about it. But can I start by saying I make no claim to be an expert in foreign affairs. I'm a writer and a journalist. I research topics. Short personal background. I'm a proud South Island West Coaster, a graduate of Greymouth Technical High School. Early work involved deer culling, fencing and wool pressing. Caught hepatitis and couldn't work physically for a couple of years, so went to Lincoln University. I flirted with farm advisory work but didn't see a lot of future in it with 5th generation farmers and high subsidies. Flirted with the army, which I thoroughly enjoyed but was never going to be a long-term career option, and became a journalist as a lifestyle choice. Worked in Australia, the USA, UK and Europe, and followed stories on the ground in China, India, Egypt, Israel, Syria, Jordan and Lebanon, Bosnia, Kosovo, Mozambique, South Africa, Angola and Bougainville. I was Radio New Zealand's editor, as Mike mentioned, during the halcyon days of the Muldoon era. And subsequent to that, I started my own media company. I'd worked in Germany and Italy where they had a kind of MMP system. And when this was coming here, I saw a future in it, and it certainly was. For the last 26 years, I've farmed, written and lived with my wife Adrian in coastal Wairarapa. About BRICS, I stumbled across BRICS while researching an article on trade and was fascinated by it. I believe BRICS has massive implications for our future, political direction and allegiances. I also believe a strong relationship with the organisation will be vital for our trading opportunities and hence our wealth as a nation. I don't see anything in BRICS we should be afraid of. Finally, I believe we need a strong public debate on the issue, and that has been sadly lacking. This evening I'd like to discuss BRICS from several perspectives. I'll introduce you to the organisation and what it does. Then like to discuss BRICS' position in the New World Order, and I'll end with what I think New Zealand should be doing as regards BRICS. Excuse me. In summary, BRICS is a New World Order. It all started with concerns about the old school Western clubs that were formed after World War II. It started with the G7 and how it was an exclusive club that largely represented that old world order. It does that with its membership being the USA, Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan and the UK, and it doesn't want anyone else. The nations forming BRICS were also disillusioned with the United Nations, which they accused of Western bias and double standards, and I can see their point. On September 19 this year, BRICS expressed concern over that Western bias to the UN and were ignored. Climate change is also a massive issue for BRICS because they feel that it was the old world order that created the problem and now they want the new world order to clean it up, and I agree with that view. They are strongly opposed to European agricultural subsidies, which I agree with. Finally, with the institutions being the subject of Western bias, there was the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. Since inception, the USA has run one organisation, with Europe running the other. There was no room for anyone else. There was also dissatisfaction in what was seen as the old Western world order generally and the dominant position of the American dollar in the world financial system. So 4 countries came together in 2009, Brazil, Russia, India and China. South Africa followed, making BRICS. As Mike mentioned earlier this year, 5 new countries were added: Egypt, Ethiopia, Sudan, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. As of now, there are 42, that's a lot, additional countries applied to join BRICS, with Turkey at the front of the queue. They include the African countries of Algeria, Ghana, Libya, Uganda and Zimbabwe. From the Americas, there's Bolivia, Colombia, Peru and Venezuela. The Arab countries, Iraq, Iran and Kuwait. The Asian countries include Bangladesh, Indonesia, Malaysia, Sri Lanka, Thailand and Vietnam. And the one European country is Belarus. In New Zealand, we recently prided ourselves on part of being part of the RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which was heralded quite loudly in the media. Compared with the BRICS group, it is very insignificant. Putting it in further perspective, the current BRICS GDP is estimated around $57 trillion, compared with the GDP of the European Union at 26.4, USA at 25.4, and the UK of 3.1. As an aside, BRICS has 30% of the world's land area and 45% of the population. Now, those figures only relate to the 5 original people. They don't include the new ones. What is of additional interest in that over 70% of the EU GDP is from services. The majority of BRICS GDP comes from production. My view to this point is that BRICS is a massive organisation set up because they weren't able to join the current Western institutions. They did approach those institutions in an effort to be part of them, and that request was refused. So already BRICS is larger than the old world organisations, with the short-term potential of becoming larger still. At this point, can I just briefly talk about China's Belt and Road Initiative, formed in 2013 with US $160 billion. It was a Chinese government initiative to boost infrastructure to support trade. It recreated the old Silk Road and has a maritime equivalent. The World Bank estimates that Belt and Road can boost trade by US 7.1 trillion a year by 2040, so that's huge. Participating countries support 75% of the world's population, over half its GDP. New Zealand joined the initiative on March 1, 2017. 140 countries are part of the initiative, but interestingly, Australia, the US and the UK aren't. My point is Belt and Road, like BRICS, is part of the New World Order. Getting back to BRICS and what it does. BRICS members are opposed to the dominance in the world financial transaction of the USA and the US dollar. A BRICS Development Bank is up and running with authorised lending of US $34 billion a year. In 2020, it financed 53 major projects. And interestingly, it's also developed a contingency reserve to protect its members from global liquidity pressures. So if you have another meltdown, they'll be kind of a lot better off than we are. Currently, world financial transactions are carried out over the US dollar-run SWIFT project. BRICS is developing an alternative to that, as well as working on forging a common currency, which I find really interesting. China has already developed an alternative to SWIFT in the form of CIPS. In addition, there's considerable trade over home currencies amongst the BRICS. An additional issue, but the political power and influence of that country. BRICS' intention is very simple: to forge a multipolar world order in which no single power dominates. And I believe they've the credentials to do that. This year, the current BRICS countries, that's the 5, will provide 37% of world GDP. Their countries have half the world's population. They have 43% of the world's oil, and that's not counting Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates or Venezuela. They've got 72% of the world's rare metals. Their GDP measured by purchasing power is greater than that of the G7. They also claim that BRICS is about producing, while a traditional West is about services. Of real interest to me is they don't actually have a permanent secretariat. It was floated and they voted against it. They have an annual general meeting lasting several days where they decide the projects they're going to do, and then they decide who's going to be in charge of them, and then it's that country's job to make it happen. It's that simple. Moving on to BRICS and the New World Order. As I said at the start, there's little, if any, discussion on BRICS and what it means to us, and that's an indictment. China's taken a jump on the traditional West with its Belt and Road initiative, and that has further expanded with BRICS. The organisation is obviously appealing to many of the less developed countries, as shown by the queues waiting to join. There's also some powerful states in the queue, and Saudi Arabia, Egypt, the UAE are there already. Throw in Venezuela for its massive oil reserves, and Turkey, Algeria, Malaysia and Indonesia, to mention a few, and the West, I believe, is well and truly challenged. The issue, as I've said, is BRICS tried to assimilate themselves in the Western world, but were refused. Will the West change anything? My belief is no. The West will continue as it always has. What I found interesting in the last few weeks was the American response to India over its dealing with Russia. The USA strongly advised India not to trade with Russia, but obviously forgetting that India and Russia are part of BRICS. India kept on regardless, as they have really strong military ties. On September 17, just past, India ordered 240 jet engines from Russia. They're to keep their Russian Sukhoi 30 Mark I jet fighters in the air, and they're the backbone of India's fighter fleet. Just talking about the USA and its position, about 20 years ago, America decided it couldn't fight a war on two fronts. It would need to restrict itself to one. Now, they're currently fighting on two fronts, in Ukraine and in the Middle East. While there's been some discussion in the last few months about opening up a third front, I don't believe that's realistically possible. What that means is that America is largely committed and its economy isn't in a healthy state. In the highly unlikely event China was to invade Taiwan, for example, I don't believe there's a lot America is capable of doing. The amount of money it's invested in the current conflicts is massive and I'd suggest unsustainable. Last year, the Ukrainian conflict cost the American taxpayer US $58.5 billion. Israel has cost them 158 so far. I'd suggest those figures can't continue. The US debt to GDP ratio is currently 123.8%, so that's 3 times ours. It's now 33.2 trillion, up from 10, 20 years ago. So I don't believe the American military system is sustainable. The two major BRICS requirements are for a new world order where one country doesn't dominate and the dollar US, and I believe they're capable of achieving both. I've been surprised and disappointed by the reaction of the West, who basically ignored them, with the exception of China. And just last week, President Biden told a gathering that Chinese military assertiveness was a real issue and something needed to be done. No mention was made of American military assertiveness. Again last week, the Japanese government suggested a Pacific elite group a little like NATO, which to me shows how out of touch Japan is, because I don't believe it's got a bolter's chance in happening. The key issue for me is about trade and trade wars. The Americans whacked a 100% tariff on Chinese electric vehicle. China responded in type. With the American presidential election coming up, Trump has said that he will put tariffs of 20% on everything, which will blow our beef trade with them. And Kamala Harris has said that tariffs needed to be increased as well. So we have issues on that front. In addition, there's the AUKUS agreement, about which I'll talk later, that's aimed at China. The agreement puts Australia in a difficult position as China's its biggest market. But I was over there recently and the anti-Chinese dialogue to me was kind of quite excessive and emotional. My personal belief is that we should be maintaining a neutral line and that the USA is incapable of taking its sabre-rattling much further. The other point of American vulnerability is that of the US dollar. As I said, that's where the majority of world trade is done. BRICS countries are using their own currencies, developing a BRICS currency, and that will have a massive effect on the US dollar. I'm no financier, but my belief is that if the US dollar falls, as it will if the BRICS initiatives are successful, then it will have a major effect on the USA economy and, as I've mentioned, dilute their political power. Just talking about our position on BRICS. Over the last few months, much to my horror, the Prime Minister has talked about a reset of our foreign affairs policy, that New Zealand can't afford to be independent. I'm totally opposed to that. We're talking about involvement in AUKUS 2, which is insane in my view. Just this morning, I don't know if you heard it on Radio New Zealand, but John Bolton, the extreme American Republican, came out and basically said that New Zealand needed to be part of part one of AUKUS, that's the nuclear bit, and that we couldn't afford to be independent, which I disagree with. Joining the US and Australia in some space initiatives aimed at countering China, as signalled by Minister Collins, is also crazy. The Prime Minister also talked about strengthening Five Eyes, which again I disagree with. It's part of the old world order that BRICS wants to change and is inevitably involved with the Middle East war. Just last week, for heaven's sake, New Zealand sent a warship into the South China Sea, if you can call any of our boats a warship. Why would you? China reacted really strongly to it, which received very little mention in the local media. Helen Clark did us a massive favour, in my view, with her independent foreign policy. We have all benefited from that. Taking us back to a partisan model isn't going to do anyone any favours, and I can't understand why we're even thinking about it. BRICS is another matter for several reasons. For a start, it's set up as a trading agreement. We're a trading nation and we're already part of Belt and Road. BRICS also wants trading in either the currency of the traders or a new global currency, and I don't have a problem with that. Finally, the old world order, which we're part of, isn't working as evidenced by the Ukraine and Middle East. Being part of a new world order in which no individual country is dominant is to be commended and doesn't involve any loss of independence. AUKUS, Five Eyes, military ships in the South China Sea and space partnerships aimed at China are quite different. The key issue to me is that the world is changing and we can choose to be part of it or not. Think of it, our largest trading partner is China. Why should we be involved in any alliance against it? We've got a proud record with China. Within days of Norman Kirk being elected in 1972, we invited China to open an embassy in New Zealand, first country to do so. Later that year, a hotel in Glenmore Street became the Chinese embassy. Leader of the opposition at the time, one R.D. Muldoon, received considerable publicity, claiming its establishment was step one in the Chinese invasion of New Zealand plan, and Muldoon predicted it would happen in 10 years, and 1982 has come and gone. As a relatively young journalist at the time, it was really interesting because if you went to a function at the Chinese embassy, you're automatically blackballed from all other embassies. It's interesting because at the time Kirk went down that track, Foreign Affairs advised strongly against it. Our UN delegate vocally opposed it. Then in 1973, one of my all-time favourite politicians, Joe Walding, led a trade delegation to China. The Chinese said they wanted a full relationship with us, covering political, economic and cultural areas. And in 2008, the then Chinese Premier and Helen Clark signed an FTA. And that was highly significant, and I'd suggest largely responsible for our standard of living today. We have an enduring relationship with China going back over half a century. We're currently attempting to get a trade agreement with India, which is part of BRICS. I don't believe we can be pro-American to the extent the Prime Minister wants us to be and achieve any agreement with India. Just looking at the BRICS countries in our history there a bit, Russia is currently busy elsewhere, but we've had huge dairy trade with Russia in the old days, but other trade opportunities, particularly wool as well. We have considerable trade potential with Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, and we have a free trade agreement with the latter. In previous years, Venezuela has been a substantial market for our dairy products. With all that in mind, I strongly believe New Zealand should be part of BRICS. The worst thing that could happen is it could threaten our trade with the USA and EU, but I don't see that as a realistic concern. In any event, the potential markets with the BRICS countries would far outweigh our trade with the old world. Indonesia has massive potential. Iran was a major trading partner. Saudi Arabia also has considerable potential. What is more important probably is that by joining BRICS, we'll be part of the new world order, not the old. We're a food producing country. We have considerable expertise in that area and life changes. When I was a student a long time ago, the Columbia Plan was alive and well. And at Lincoln, we had quite a few Asian students there. And the rationale behind that was that we should be able to trade those countries to be self-sufficient in food. It was acknowledged they would never be an export market. How things have changed. For Asia 50 years ago, today's equivalent in my view is Africa. Africa is part of both BRICS and Belt and Road. South America is the same. I don't see either Africa or South America subsidising their food industries as Europe, the USA, Canada and the UK do. Just look at those subsidies for a minute. Currently they're US $800 billion according to the OECD, who predict that by 2030, just 5 years away, they'll be US $2 trillion. Of interest is that 87% of agricultural subsidies, according to the UN, are environmentally harmful. So on top of the arms spend, the old world, as it were, will spend $2 trillion on agricultural subsidies in 5 years' time. They'll have a direct effect on us as we can't compete against subsidised product. There is one more reason why I believe our future is with the emerging world, not the old world order, the unsubsidised farming countries. The World Trade Organization exists to promote international rules-based trade. It was formed by 123 countries in 1994. We've taken successfully quite a few cases to the WTO and won. In the past decade, America basically has ritually disemboweled the WTO, preferring the law of the jungle. That is certainly not in New Zealand's interest. What I find extremely frustrating is that there is no discussion at any level within New Zealand that I could ascertain about BRICS, the challenges and opportunities. There's also been minimal coverage on Belt and Road. For those reasons I've outlined, I believe we should be part of BRICS. We certainly need to start a debate on it. Just in conclusion, BRICS was formed because emerging economies, in the case those of both China and India, wanted to join the established institutions. Those countries are currently the second and third biggest economies of the world, and I'd put money by 2030 they'll be first and second. They were told they're not wanted, so BRICS was formed. It is now considerably bigger than those old world organisations. Those organisations, in my opinion, have a limited effectiveness and shorter lifespan. BRICS has a collegiate approach where no one country dominates. We have developed initiatives to trade in the American dollar. The developed initiatives counter trade in the American dollar, which will weaken it. They've gone from a membership of 4 to 5 to 10 in short order, with 42 countries waiting to join. They're an organisation of both established and developing countries, and I'd suggest we should be part of BRICS and not cozying up to the USA as we're currently doing. Thank you.
Just take that mic, yeah. Oh, thank you very much, Alan, for that explanation about BRICS. Okay, the floor's open for questions. Marion and then Jack. I'll give you the mic, okay?
I think it's turned off, Mike. Just press it.
Thanks, Tim. I'm not too sure how sensible I'm going to make this question. I'm sorry, because I found that really fascinating, and I've been dying to have a discussion about BRICS and understand it. How is BRICS viewed by large companies, international companies, like oil companies, So you have something like Saudi Arabia and BRICS, and yet I view Saudi Arabia from a socialist viewpoint with deep suspicion. Do you see what I mean? So there's a big capitalist organisation. How the hell does BRICS work with those?
That's a very interesting question, Marion, and I'm glad you asked. When I was researching this, I rang up 3 directors I know on the boards of big New Zealand companies and said, what do you think of BRICS? And none of them knew anything about it. What's interesting as an aside is that they were all 3 were nervous about Luxon cozying up with America on the commercial side. The short answer is I have no idea, but I'd go back to Helen Clark's independent position that if we have an independent position, we're fine. If we don't, I don't believe we are. So, Saudi Arabia's got major issues. America would claim China has. And Helen's position was that we're a trading nation, we're independent, and we're not going to get kind of involved in the intricacies, and I would support that.
That wasn't always the case, though. Even at times, we went into Afghanistan, and although we went in very carefully, we were trying to get a trade deal with the United States. We weren't always as pure and as independent as we make out.
No, well, I might see my RSA badge, but the Americans came here with Vietnam and said, you go to Vietnam and we'll give you a free trade organisation. We went to Vietnam, I lost several mates there, and we still haven't got a free trade agreement. So, yeah, it's an old army saying, basically translated, bullshit baffles brains, and that's very much part of the rhetoric.
Jeff? Two things that I'd like to just chase up in what you've said. First is the case for standing back from deep engagement with AUKUS and the United States seems to me conclusive. It's very straightforward. It takes you to an independent stance, and there I am entirely with you, but you are not going to an independent stance. You want to move us into the opposing bloc to the BRICS. In other words, rather than independence, you're arguing for us to take what is effectively an anti-American stance explicitly. And in the process, and here's the second thing that worries me, as you emphasised in the middle of what you were saying, BRICS is in fact not merely an economic arrangement, but it is also a military arrangement with explicit military agreements, with a commitment to a whole range of armaments from the Russian and Chinese arms industry, all of them directed clearly, towards a geopolitical confrontation. And I don't follow either why we can't be independent rather than rushing to join BRICS, and secondly, why we would not really have extremely cold feet about BRICS itself as a club for us to join. I mean, I don't think there's any heroes in global geopolitics, put it that way. And I don't really believe that there are great good guys, and I really don't believe also that BRICS will be free of great power dominance any more than we in the West have been free of United States imperialist dominance. So just those two things I'm uneasy about.
No, thank you for that, and really valid points. My position, getting back to the US, is that they are not a trading organisation after the presidential election. They won't be, and we are traders. I believe it is possible, and it's my opinion only, I hasten to add, to be able to be part of BRICS as a trading organisation. Now, America's close to Saudi Arabia, for example, and Saudi Arabia's in BRICS. So your points are completely valid, but I would sooner be part of BRICS as the trading group, same as, say, Brazil is, than kind of tied up with America as the current Prime Minister is taking us.
But that's not
I think we can be independent, as Helen Clark established, and join BRICS as a trader. Now, as I said at the start, I'm a writer, not an expert in foreign affairs, but that is my view.
Well, I mean, I think there'll be other people who want to leap into this. I don't believe that you have to join BRICS in the formal sense to trade with them. And I guess that's where you and I would differ. You think that in order to get trade access, we have to sign up to the rest of the agenda, which is an intensely geopolitical one. And I have no more desire to find New Zealand troops fighting alongside India, China and Russia than I have to see them fighting alongside the Americans and the Israelis.
I would agree.
Before my question, just my point about his thinking. BRICS is not a military alliance. So it's purely different agenda, economic, trade, and so on, 1, 2, 3, 4. For example, how China and India border, they're fighting in the border, how can be alliance? Okay, so it's completely it's out. They are not a military alliance. Okay, my question to you is, so the main problem the BRICS countries are facing is the trade balances. For example, India is importing almost oil and gas, everything from Russia, but Russia is not buying enough stuff from India, okay? So this is the biggest challenge at the moment BRICS is facing. Recently, Bangladesh has agreed to buy oil from Russia, paying in Chinese currency. It has been signed.
Yes.
So therefore, two countries are trading, not using their currency, but Chinese currency has been. My question to you is that very important for BRICS common currency? Can they run it without the currency for the next 5 years? I'm doubting about the common currency because of these trade balances and things. What is your view on that?
The short answer is I don't feel qualified to give you an answer because I'm not an economist, but there's been discussion for years about common currencies over various geopolitical groups, and the difference between a BRICS currency and the US dollar when it comes to trading, and I accept exactly what you're saying with trade imbalances. I don't see a lot of difference.
Okay, sorry. Len? Oh, sorry. Thanks.
Kia ora. In terms of New Zealand's trading position, my own impression is not so much that we are choosing the wrong side or that we're looking for a better trading partner, but the fact that New Zealand is just a hopelessly naive country to believe that people will always line up to buy our goods when the entire world seems to be rushing towards protectionism and the development of their own sources of supply, and often internally. And we seem to have missed the fact that China, for example, is heavily investing in its own dairy industry and doesn't seem to have any real commitment to buying New Zealand products in the long term. That's more of a general observation, but I was wondering if you could say a little more about what the benefits within BRICS are. Is this basically a free trade agreement that is looking at removing tariffs amongst the countries within it? And what is the attitude, if you happen to know, of the now rather moribund World Trade Organization towards BRICS?
I wouldn't have a clue of the attitude of the WTO to BRICS. I would expect, like the other institutions, it would be ambivalent. You rightly point out about trade barriers, which are getting crazy at the moment, to trade with the EU, you've got to do an audited deal that you trees down to produce the milk or whatever it is you're trying to sell to them. So as well as the old traditional tariff barriers, you've got those as well. We've traded in the past heavily with Iran, with Russia. We still trade with China. Our trade with America is quite big on beef at the moment because they've got a shortage there with their dairy herd. But when that builds up again, that's going to go. Trade with the EU has got so many kind of hurdles in its way, in my view, that bureaucracy is going to be excessive. Your point about naivety, I'd actually agree with. But, we give it our best shot, I think, and we're a small, insignificant trading nation. We've got 5 million people and we can feed 40 million. That's going to be paramount. But can I just come back to the Colombo Plan argument? When I was at university, Asia was never going to be a market, full stop. Now it's a huge market, far bigger than the US in the normal course of events. So you can have countries developing, as with Africa, that can end up in this position. So it can be an investment in the future.
Sorry, can I just make a comment? I heard, and it must have been on Al Jazeera, an interesting comment the other day about African nations taking off tariffs amongst themselves recently.
Yeah.
And there's been some extraordinary work of Kenyan tea being sold over to other parts on the west coast of Africa, and I found that quite extraordinary. And that's the attraction of BRICS to a certain amount, as you begin to get trade going more easily amongst countries that, yeah.
Well, just in the basic BRICS document, they do not support subsidies on food production.
Right.
Hello. I agree with you what you said about AUKUS. We shouldn't really be into it, but that's not my main concern. Sorry, is this working?
Put it up close to now.
Yep. Okay, right. There seem to be two reasons why I object to what you were saying we should go into the BRICS, and they're both countries, and one is Russia going in there, and at the same time continuous expansion in the Pacific, and in recent times the Philippines, poor little relatively small third world country, having their fishing boats being pushed off their fishing grounds by aggressive Chinese action. The other one is the Russian, and of course, there's Ukraine, but Putin also relies on restoring the Soviet Union. Yeah. So I would hate to see us in BRICS because it could be, it's just not our sort of organisation. We'd be best to stay independent.
Which I obviously don't agree with, but getting back to Russia, there's no way I would support the invasion of Ukraine, but I can understand why it happened. And it falls firmly on the West, in my view, and that the agreement going back to Reagan days was that they wouldn't push the West up against Russian boundaries and then try to get Ukraine into NATO. Well, that's going to make Russia nervous. Now, as I said, I'm not supporting the invasion, but I can see reasons possibly why they did it.
Would you agree to put some Chinese missile around Mexican border?
What's that, sorry?
Would you agree to put some Chinese missiles around Mexican border next to US?
Here's a thought.
What's the difference with Ukraine situation?
Okay. Any other questions at all? And then I'll say a few things. No. Well, I think, Alan, what I take actually from out of your presentation, most importantly, is that we're seeing a massive shift in the state of the world's relationships, put it that way. And what I think is happening is the different way in which the relationships are actually developing. Because what I take out of how BRICS is developing, it is on the basis of, as you say, it's multipolar. It's a bit like ASEAN. Nobody has the right to dominate anybody else. So, and what's happened in its history, as I observe it, you've got extraordinary developments like China brokering an agreement between Iran and Saudi Arabia. So you've got the Taoist, Buddhist, Confucianists bringing together the Sunni and the Shia, and you're talking about exponential, where the growth is in those countries. So I mean, to me, the future is quite clearly not with us; it's with Asia and Africa too. Africa going, and look where they are going. And I think the point for us is to actually, rather than sort of say, oh, let's not go there, I think the point that you're making, which I totally agree with, let's have a look at what they're doing, and, you know, a careful look. On the issues of security, as I understand it, again, BRICS is a trading relationship. The security organisations are the Shanghai Cooperation Organisation, which is another set of groupings which has security interests and is working on them together. So you know, anyway, just to summarise, and I'd be interested in your response to why I think you're right for us to say to us it's something we should look at, because, you know, if I think, you know, 20 or 30 years into the future when I won't be here, that's where the action is going to be, and we should be having a very good, close, careful look at it, in my opinion. Welcome your comment.
Well, I obviously would agree, but to me, my frustration is there's absolutely no discussion. You said you did a media search and there was two people, me and one other.
Yeah.
It's a huge indictment. It's got to be discussed, and it's got to be something that people understand so that we can make informed decisions on it. Yeah. At the moment, there's not a chance in hell of that happening.
Well, yeah. Well, anyone else would like to comment? I mean, I've had my wee say. Anyone else would like to comment?
Well, I just totally back up what both of you said. I do think it is something we should explore. I think there are lots and lots of questions that it raises for me. I can never see anything as pure trade. I always think there are other things around it, and that's what I'd be interested in.
Yeah.
But at the moment, we are ignoring some of the growing economies at our peril. And then we've got to look at environmental things, and then we've got to look at immigration things that are all going to affect as a result of things. The UN isn't doing it for me at the moment.
It's not doing it for me either.
But so we look. I'm not looking for United Nations or politics, but at least to begin talking. So this group. Thank you for organising this. But I think I'd like us to chase and see if we can find some more people.
Well, yes. Okay. All right. Well, just to finish, to say that our Fabian motto, our Aotearoa Fabian motto is incite debate, and that's what this is. That was, in my mind, certainly the purpose of inviting Alan to speak to him, simply because, as I said, he was one of the two that had actually looked at what, to me, is a huge, massive issue and, in my opinion, opportunity. And I think we would be crazy to ignore it. So thanks very much, Alan. Thank you for being the person who actually looked at it and brought it to us, and it's good to hear. And we certainly will follow up on it. I agree with that, absolutely.